They say the best revenge is living well. But I'll let you in on a little secret. The real best revenge is sitting across the dinner table from your enemies and letting them think they've already won. Most people would never guess I was wealthy. That's not false modesty. It's just the truth. I drove a faded 2006 Toyota Tacoma with a cracked side mirror I kept forgetting to replace. I wore old flannel shirts from the same local store I'd been shopping at for years. My watch was a scratched Casio that cost less than most people spend on dinner. And honestly, I liked it that way, because the second people think you have money, they stop seeing you clearly. My name is Frank Colleton. For more than 2 decades, I quietly owned one of the largest manufacturing and logistics companies in the region. Thousands of employees, millions moving across state lines every month, contracts big enough to make lawyers nervous. But outside my little house in Beckley, West Virginia, I just looked like an older guy watering tomatoes before sunset, and that suited me perfectly. My daughter Lacey never understood why I enjoyed disappearing into ordinary life. She inherited her mother's brightness. Smart, funny, beautiful enough to turn heads without trying. Unfortunately, she also inherited her mother's weakness for charming men. That's how Clayton Hale entered our lives. The first time I shook his hand, I knew exactly what kind of man he was. Not evil, not arrogant exactly, just polished. The kind of man the world opens doors for before he even knocks. Still, I checked him out quietly after he started dating Lacey. Financial history, career trajectory, professional reputation, old habits. When you spend 30 years protecting a company, you learn not to trust appearances. What surprised me was that Clayton actually impressed me. He was sharp, focused, ambitious without being reckless. And when Lacey told me she was serious about him, I made a decision that changed all our lives. Without telling him who I really was, I arranged for Clayton to become the CEO of my company. To him, it looked legitimate. A prestigious recruitment firm contacted him. A formal board interviewed him. Executives evaluated him. Every step was real. I just happened to own every step. Lacey thought the whole thing was insane. "Dad," she told me one night over tea, "this sounds like something from a billionaire soap opera." "I prefer strategic family planning," I told her. She rolled her eyes so hard I thought she might injure herself. But for 14 months everything worked. Better than I expected. Clayton handled pressure well. He improved operations, increased profits, earned respect inside the company. Part of me was proud of him. The other part hated admitting my daughter had chosen wisely. Then one Thursday evening, everything shifted. Clayton called and invited me to dinner with his parents. His tone sounded normal, but something underneath it bothered me immediately. "They've really been wanting to meet you properly," he said. That sentence stayed with me after the call ended, not because of what he said, because of the pause before he said it. And after 30 years in business, I had learned one dangerous truth. People hesitate right before they lie. If you've ever trusted your gut and later realized it saved you, subscribe to the channel. Some lessons only make sense after life forces you to learn them the hard way. I almost declined the invitation. I should have. But I've never been the kind of man who runs from uncomfortable feelings. I walked toward them slowly and let them explain themselves. So 2 nights later, wearing my cleanest flannel shirt, I walked into the most expensive restaurant in the city and sat down across from the Hale family for the dinner that was about to change everything. The restaurant was the kind of place where nobody looked at the menu prices because people there didn't need to. Soft piano music floated through the room. Every glass sparkled. Every conversation happened in low, controlled voices, like rich people were afraid excitement might wrinkle their clothes. Clayton greeted me near the entrance, wearing a tailored charcoal jacket that probably cost more than my truck. "You made it," he said with a smile. "I found parking and survived valet judgment," I replied. He laughed, but something in his face looked strained. Tiny things tell the truth long before words do. Inside, his parents were already seated. Stuart Hale stood first. Tall, silver-haired, perfect posture, the kind of man who practiced authority in mirrors. But the second he shook my hand, I felt it. Too warm, too eager. People carrying hidden agendas always overcompensate with politeness. "Frank," he said, "we've heard so much about you." Norma smiled beside him, touching my arm lightly. "You look wonderfully comfortable," she said. Translation, "You don't belong here." I smiled anyway. Dinner started pleasantly enough. Small talk, business chatter, vacation stories, but underneath it all, something heavy sat at that table waiting for its moment. And then it arrived. Right between the main course and dessert, Stuart reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick cream-colored envelope. He laid it gently in front of me. Clayton immediately looked down at his plate. That was the moment I knew. Whatever this was, he already knew enough to fear it. "Frank," Stuart said carefully, "there are things about the past we believe deserve discussion." I looked at the envelope, then at him, then at Clayton. And suddenly a name I hadn't heard in decades came rushing back into my mind. Victor Marsh. I didn't open the envelope immediately. That bothered Stuart more than I expected. See, men like him rehearse moments like this in their heads. They imagine fear, panic, defensiveness. They don't know what to do when you stay calm. So instead, I took another bite of steak and let the silence stretch across the table. Norma shifted uncomfortably. Stuart's smile tightened. Clayton still couldn't meet my eyes. Finally, I opened the envelope. Inside were old documents, copied records, and highlighted financial statements. But the second I saw Victor's name at the top, I already understood the story Stuart believed. And honestly, part of me felt sorry for him. Back in the late 80s, Victor Marsh had been my business partner. We built a manufacturing company together from almost nothing. Long nights, cheap offices, cold coffee, the kind of struggle that bonds young men before life teaches them what greed can do. For years, I trusted him completely. That was my mistake. Victor had been quietly stealing from the company the entire time. Not enough to notice immediately, just enough to hollow things out slowly. By the time I discovered it, he had already started building a competing business behind my back, using our clients, our money, and my relationships. I spent 6 months gathering proof. Every transfer, every forged document, every hidden account. Then I sat him down and gave him 2 options. Disappear quietly or face prison publicly. He chose to disappear. I rebuilt the company alone and never spoke his name again. But Stuart had grown up hearing a different version of that story. In his version, his brother was the victim. And now, after all these years, he believed he was finally getting justice. "You destroyed him," Stuart said quietly. "No," I answered. "Victor destroyed himself." His jaw tightened instantly. "He died with nothing." "And whose fault was that?" I asked calmly. The anger in his eyes sharpened. Then came the real reason for the dinner. He wanted money, a settlement, a resignation from the company, and most importantly, silence. He thought the threat of exposing old accusations would scare me into surrendering quietly. But what he didn't understand was this. I had already prepared for this dinner before I ever walked through the door. Because instincts matter, and mine had kept me alive in business for 30 years. So while Stuart stared at me like a man holding a loaded weapon, I reached calmly into my jacket and placed my own envelope on the table. Smaller, simpler, far more dangerous. The entire table went silent. "These," I said softly, "are the original bank records Victor never showed you." Stuart's expression changed instantly. I continued. Transfers into hidden accounts, shell companies in his wife's maiden name, emails discussing plans to steal clients from our business. Norma's face lost color. Clayton finally looked up fully for the first time all night. And then I placed the final piece on the table. "A sworn affidavit from Victor's accountant," I said. "Still alive, still willing to testify." Stuart stared at me like the floor had vanished underneath him. Because suddenly the story he had spent decades believing was collapsing in real time. If stories about betrayal, family, and hard truths hit close to home, subscribe. Some people spend their whole lives protecting lies because the truth hurts too much to face. Then I turned toward Clayton. And that's when the night truly changed. Because the next thing I was about to tell him would completely destroy the version of reality he'd been living in for the last 14 months. I looked directly at Clayton. "What do you actually know about how you got your job?" I asked. He frowned slightly. "I was recruited, interviewed by the board." "You were," I said. "Every part of the process was real." Then I leaned back in my chair. "But the company you've been running for the last 14 months belongs to me." The silence after that felt enormous. Clayton blinked once like his brain needed time to catch up. "You own Colton Marsh?" he asked. "I built it," I replied calmly. Every building, every contract, every executive sitting above you reports to me. Across the table, Stuart looked physically ill. And for the first time all night, Clayton turned toward his father with something colder than confusion in his eyes. "You knew?" he asked quietly. Stuart tried to defend himself. He talked about family, about revenge, about protecting Victor's memory. But Clayton wasn't listening anymore. "You used me," he said flatly. "You let me build a relationship with Lacey because you thought it would get you close to him." Nobody answered, because nobody could. Then Clayton looked back at me, and I finally saw the panic leave his face. In its place was something better. Character. "I should have stopped this dinner the second I realized what was happening," he admitted. I nodded slowly. "The important thing is that you know it now." A long silence passed before I finally spoke again. "You still have your job Monday morning." Relief hit his face so fast he couldn't hide it. Stuart and Norma left shortly after, without another real argument left to make. And when the restaurant finally quieted again, Clayton looked at me and asked the one question that actually mattered. "Do you trust me?" I smiled slightly. "You saved this company millions before you even knew it was mine," I said. "Yeah, son, I trust you." If you enjoyed this story, subscribe for more emotional family revenge stories where patience always wins in the end.